The underbrush erupted. Kalen hurled the vial of reactive pollen, and the forest floor instantly transformed into a corridor of leaping lightning and white fire. Scav raiders screamed as the mycelium mats ignited beneath their boots. Vara watched the Terran stand his ground against the inferno. He didn't even flinch. What drives a man to burn the very world he's trying to save? We'll find out next. That same acrid scent of scorched spores. She had first inhaled it 3 days ago, right before the iron teeth of an off-world moss snare snapped shut on her leg. Beneath the weeping canopy of Eryxophore, the silence of the woods pressed down like a hell breath. Too complete, too wrong. Vara, a seasoned Xylo scout, knew the stillness meant death. Her blood pulsed hot against the rusted iron of the trap. Beside her, little Lumi tugged frantically at the mechanism. The child's hands were too weak. A wet crunch echoed through the bioluminescence of the ferns. Vara bared her teeth. Terran. He wore a sealed rebreather and heavy plating. He stopped, tracking the high-pitched scream Lumi had let out moments earlier. Vara gripped the vortex sigil hanging around her neck. The carved spiral token was a promise of safe passage among her kind, useless against a scorchwalker. She prepared for the end. Instead, the Terran dropped to his knees. He wedged a shard of hardened bark straight into the trap's primary hinge. Muscles corded along his forearms as he pried the jaws open. Vara gasped, her vision swimming in the thick spore haze. Then he reached for her. Terran Xylo's contact was a profound cultural rot, a biological taboo forged in the fires of failed terraforming. His kind brought the sickness. Her kind carried the scars. To share space was dangerous. To share breath was a death sentence. Yet, his gloved hands were startlingly gentle. He lifted her, ignoring the venomous sap weeping from the snare's teeth. Vara's people taught that humanity was a plague, a relentless force of consumption that left only ash in its wake. But as she pressed her face against the cold plating of his chest armor, she heard the steady, terrified thud of his heart. He was just as afraid of the woods as she was. The journey through the deep woods was a battle of inches. The feral vines, driven by a hyper-accelerated phototropic response to the Terran's flare beacon, lunged at them from the dark. It wasn't malice. It was basic biochemistry. The vegetation here survived by rapidly metabolizing heat and light into kinetic energy, turning the local flora into a predatory snare. The Terran seemed to know this perfectly. He periodically dimmed his suit lights, using the brief windows of total darkness to bypass the densest mycelium mats. He navigated by memory and pure desperation. He hadn't touched another living being in 4 years. Now he held a dying world in his arms. They emerged into a clearing. The shell dome stood against the bleeding sky, a repurposed remnant of old terraforming efforts. It glowed with the faint light of a perimeter screen. Inside, the air was scrubbed clean. Vara woke on a makeshift cot. Her leg was bandaged. The Terran sat across the room, meticulously cleaning a resin blade. He carried the heavy silence of a man drowning in terra guilt. He was trying to fix a planet his people had broken. And he was failing. But he was trying. He calibrated the moisture processors. He checked the perimeter alarms. He never looked directly at her, respecting the boundaries of their forbidden proximity. Little Lumi sat by Vara's side, watching the Terran with wide, unblinking eyes. The child did not understand the heavy history between their species. Lumi only saw the man who broke the iron trap. If you want to see how this unlikely alliance survives the long night, make sure to come back for the conclusion. By the 4th night, the perimeter alarms shrieked. A heavy spore storm battered the shell dome. The atmospheric scrubbers whined a pathetic, high-pitched mechanical death rattle under the sheer volume of toxic particulate pressing against the intake vents. Vara dragged her aching body to the reinforced observation window. Shadows moved through the swirling bioluminescence of the tree line. Scav raiders. They were testing the sensor grid, probing for a weak point in the dome's aging shields. These were the dregs of the sector. They were brutal, starving scavengers who picked clean the bones of failed colonies and left nothing but corpses behind. She looked back at the Terran. Kalen was already strapping on his heavy plating. He checked the atmospheric seal on his rebreather, his movements tight, practiced, and utterly devoid of hope. He fully expected to die defending a broken habitat. He grabbed a thick canvas satchel filled with vials of reactive pollen, his knuckles white against the dark fabric, and moved toward the heavy airlock door. Vara looked down at her bandaged leg. The swelling had receded thanks to the Terran's persistent, silent care. She reached down and gripped the handle of her resin blade. The cultural taboo burned fiercely in her mind. Generations of warnings screamed at her to stay behind, to let the scorch walker fall, to preserve her own life at the cost of his. Instead, she limped toward the airlock to join him. The storm hit them like a physical blow the second the doors cycled open. Thick, suffocating spore haze blinded her. The Scav Raiders breached the outer ring, their rusted kinetic weapons drawn, expecting a terrified, easy prey cowering inside the dome. The underbrush erupted just as Kalen threw the glass. His vial of reactive pollen shattered against a boulder, and the forest floor instantly transformed into a blinding corridor of leaping lightning and white fire. Scav Raiders screamed as the ignition caught them. Vara watched the Terran stand his ground against the inferno, an immovable object bathed in the light of the burning world. But she did not just watch. The lead raider charged blindly through the flames. His scavenged armor was smoking, and he aimed a crude, jagged spear directly at the Terran's exposed back. Kalen was entirely focused on the tree line, deafened by the roar of the fire. Vara lunged. She ignored the agonizing, tearing pain in her calf. She drove her resin blade upward, finding the soft, unarmored joint beneath the raider's breastplate. The scavenger collapsed with a wet gasp, the spear clattering harmlessly against Kalen's boots. The remaining hostiles, seeing their massive leader fall, and the woods burning furiously around them, broke rank. They fled back into the suffocating dark of the deep woods. Vara fell to her knees, gasping for air, fully expecting the Terran to turn his weapon on her now that the immediate threat was neutralized. He merely holstered his weapon and offered her a hand up. The next morning smelled of ash and raw ozone. The charred soil of the perimeter garden lay entirely barren, swept clean by the fire. Vara knelt in the dirt beside the Terran. Together, in absolute silence, they planted a new row of delicate, luminescent sky plants into the scorched earth. She reached up and unclasped the vortex sigil from her neck. It had always been a token of passage, a desperate plea for mercy among the wandering Xylos tribes. Now, she pressed the carved spiral deep into the soil beneath a heart-shaped stone arrangement, burying the past to anchor the future. A few yards away, Kalen finished carving a fresh wooden sign for the habitat entrance. Little Lumi scrambled happily up his back, settling comfortably onto the broad shoulders of the Scorchwalker. If you loved this story of surviving against the odds, hit that subscribe button to join our crew. We explore a new world every single day, and you won't want to miss tomorrow's drop.